All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Oheneba Amainti-Osei, and on behalf of the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in the USA, I'd like to welcome you all to this educational program on why we need to be paying more attention to water and how we can ensure the sustainability of this vital resource on which we all depend. Before I introduce our guests, kindly note that this event is brought to you in partnership with PepsiCo, and the AFPC is solely responsible for the development of this program. Now to our guest, we're pleased to have here with us today David Grant, Director of Global Water Sustainability at PepsiCo. David oversees PepsiCo's water stewardship agenda and supports the company in delivering its global water strategy. Also with us today is Kari Vigerstol, Director of Water Security Science and Innovation for the Nature Conservancy, where she's advancing the science behind the Conservancy source water protection and water scarcity strategies. And then last but not the least, Will Sarni, CEO Water Foundry and General Partner Water Foundry Ventures. Prior to Water Foundry, Will was Managing Director at Deloitte Consulting, where he established and led the water strategy practice. David, Kari, Will, thank you all for joining us today. We're really honored to have you here with us.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. Let's dive right in. I'd like each of you in 1 minute or less, very briefly describe your role and why you are personally passionate about your work, and then we can delve into some more specific questions. We'll start with David, then Kari, and Will. David, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much. So that's David Grant, as mentioned. So my overall role within PepsiCo is really to drive down our net positive water strategy, which effectively looks at what we do from a water use efficiency in our operations, the great work we're doing in watersheds, both for our own operations and our agricultural sourcing region, work with community water access, and then finally on water governance as well. So this spans all of PepsiCo's operations and our third-party manufacturers as well, and as I mentioned, goes into our agricultural value chain as well. And I guess what got me into this area, I guess, is two things. One is I come from an agrarian background, so a lot of my family are farmers, and really drove home at an early age how critical water is, particularly from the farming community point of view. And then the second is that I'm quite an avid fly fisherman, so I spend a lot of time in water, and just really seeing how quickly the ecosystems get impacted by poor water quality. And that's really driven home to me how important it is that we manage this really critical resource. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Kari?
Thank you so much. So what inspired me to get into water is how what keeps me deeply engaged is how it connects all of us. It's something we all need. It's above us, below us, all around us. It crosses political boundaries. It feeds us. It connects us. It shows up in almost every culture and religion. In our history, it determined where we settled and whether those settlements failed or survived. And my role right now is at the Nature Conservancy as a director of science, as you mentioned, for our global water security work. I'm an engineer by training and a scientist by profession, but my passion really lies in creating these collaborations around solving these big water challenges and impacting policies and supporting the sustainability of communities. I found that starting with that science background is a really good foundation for that. So that's why I kind of stayed in that science track in order to make this impact. Starting with this objective understanding of where we are in terms of ecosystem and water system health can serve as a powerful platform for conversations amongst different stakeholders on where we can go from there. And my role at this organization, at the Nature Conservancy, is really to promote that role of nature in making sure that we have a sustainable water system to serve all the needs that we have going forward across the globe.
Thank you, Kari. Will?
Sure. So thanks for the opportunity to participate in the conversation. Where I sit in the world of water is water strategy, working primarily for U.S. and non-U.S. multinationals on building leadership strategies and having an impact. Also on technology innovation So I do quite a bit of work with innovative water technology companies, both startups through growth stage and established commercial ventures, and then investing. So think about it as a Venn diagram. I really sort of sit at the middle of that. And, from my perspective, it really is an exciting place to be right now because of all the things that are going on in a positive way, and how stakeholders are really engaging on solving water. In terms of my journey, I started out in school thinking that I wanted to go into oceanography until I got a job with a groundwater consulting firm in New York, and I got hooked, like profoundly hooked on this notion, mission, cause to find and deliver safe drinking water, both in the United States and the Caribbean. So there was really kind of no going back to oceanography at that point, and it's been a great career. Also, since David brought up fly fishing, I am compelled to bring up rowing, and I have found that my professional career intersects really nicely and profoundly with what I do recreationally, which is get out on the water and row, and bringing my fellow rowers into this world of water stewardship and conservation has been incredibly rewarding and just a huge opportunity. So I'm passionate about what I do. I love what I do, and it does not feel like work most days.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Definitely lots to unpack here. And I want to start with sort of going back to the question today that we're asking. What is the state of water in the world today? Why do we need to be paying more attention to these resources? David, any thoughts on that? And then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure Kari have a far more scientific view than I have, but I think for me, if you go back to the basics, right? Of the total, we consider ourselves a blue planet, but of the water in the world, 3% is fresh water. 2/3 of that is locked up in icebergs or otherwise unavailable. So we're essentially working with a tiny fraction of water that is fresh and available to us. And that water is under a lot of strain at the moment. I was reading a report recently from the World Resources Institute where they're saying that a quarter of the world's population currently lives in areas that where they experience water stress on an annual basis. If you expand that scope to people who experience stress at least once a year, that's around 50% of the global population. So enormous amount of our population is currently living with water stress. If you look at how that then translates into economic impacts, that's around, I think the last estimate I saw was around $470 billion per year is lost through impacts related to water. And then also, I guess, importantly, from an ecosystem point of view, great example is WWF puts out an annual report in terms of their freshwater index, and it's around 84% of freshwater species have been lost since, or populations have been lost since the 1970s. And this kind of shows you how detrimental a position we are in. And then in terms of what drives that, I think there are a couple of key drivers here. One is obviously demand. Demand has kind of increased sixfold, since about the 1960s, and continues to get driven. In the developing world, we're starting to see a plateau a bit. But in developing countries, that trajectory is still going quite steeply. We've got failing infrastructure, just for the lack of investment. And what that means is that you have a massive amount of water lost in the system. So, I think it's about 36 billion cubic meters, gets lost through water leakage every year, and particularly in areas where they can't afford that. And then a large amount of wastewater is not treated. So I think it's about 40%, depending on whose figures you look at. And that goes into natural water systems, right, and causes pollution, which we're seeing impacts us. Water is also significantly undervalued. And that causes problems in the sense that there's no incentive then to conserve water. I mean, why would you if you're paying almost nothing for water? And also, what that also creates is a lack of investment into water as well. People just don't want to invest in new technology because water is so cheap and the return on that is so low. The final two, that I'll probably pull out there is regulatory frameworks and policy around water has been traditionally really poor, which is probably half the problem with where we are today, is because water is not managed, governed really well. And then the final one I'd say is climate change. Climate change is basically exacerbating everything that we're feeding from water now, and it's accelerating that quite significantly. So yeah, that would be my view at the moment.
Kari, any thoughts on the scientific aspect of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think David provided some of those stats around what's going on in terms of water scarcity. So thanks, David. I think that was painted a really good picture of the current situation and some of the factors that have led us there. I just want to mention a couple of other aspects. When I think about the state of the world in terms of water, I think there are a few different dimensions. And, water scarcity is a huge one, or water quantity. But also David alluded to and mentioned water quality and the ecosystem health, freshwater ecosystems, which is much more impacted than terrestrial or marine ecosystems, and also providing water for people, water and sanitation. So all of those dimensions, I think, are really important when we're looking at the state of water in the world today. I think on water scarcity, on water quantity, the only other aspect I might mention is groundwater, just really pulling that out and focusing on that. I don't know how many of you saw the articles in the New York Times this past week around groundwater in the United States, but it painted a really dire picture, something that those of us sitting here were keenly aware of, but it's great. And this is why I'm happy to be here for this conversation when someone like the New York Times pulls together that data and tells the story of what's happening across the country. And really, groundwater has not been really managed properly or at all in most places. And part of that is because we don't see it, and we just think it's always going to be there, but it's not. And we're really drawing down our aquifers in many places across the globe. So I think that's a really important aspect of water scarcity we need to address and think about. And on water quality, we've, to be honest, we've done a pretty good job in many places in the developed world, for example, in the United States, Europe, Australia, and other places, where in curtailing point source pollution, the kind of pollution that comes out of a pipe, through regulation here in the United States through the Clean Water Act. Before that, we had stories of rivers on fire, and you would never think about swimming or fishing in some of your local rivers, maybe will in some of the places that you're rowing. But now, for example, here in Seattle, I like to open water swim, and Lake Washington here was in terrible shape back in the 70s or 80s. But because of regulation and management of those waterways, now we're able to engage with those waterways in different ways and really have turned the corner on that. But we're really still struggling with non-point source pollution, with pollution that comes from pollutants being on the landscape and water running across the landscape, picking those up and ending up in our waterways, which is causing eutrophication in our freshwater waterways, but also in our nearshore marine areas, which then have impacts on fisheries and other parts of the ecosystem. So I just wanted to hit on those, and then on water and sanitation, which is an important part of the picture. We have made a good progress in terms of number of people that are being served in terms of water access and sanitation access, but we still have a large number of people that don't have access to this. So still 2 billion people are lacking access to clean water, and more than 3.5 billion people lacking access to adequate sanitation. And all of those aspects, water quantity, water quality, WASH, that's water and sanitation, and ecosystems, are all interrelated. So the challenges around quantity and quality impact the access to clean water. They impact freshwater ecosystems, and our ecosystems also impact all of those other aspects. So our ecosystems in our watersheds have a huge impact on the health of our waterways and the ability to naturally filter and store and provide clean, reliable water for people and for nature.
Awesome. Thanks, Kari. And Will, I mean, David and Kari have given us sort of the lay of the land. What do you think in terms of, the global challenges in addressing that water scarcity today?
Sure. So first of all, I agree with my colleagues. very strongly in terms of their take on where we're at. I would say just to be additive here, I absolutely believe that humanity's relationship with water is broken, and it was broken before we had a clue what climate change was all about. And climate change is a threat multiplier, and making it more acute and more, unfortunately, more impactful. So starting with that, I would say that, how did we get here? I think we got here for a number of the reasons that both Kari and David touched on, which is, I think there's this perceived abundance of water in most parts of the world. I live in the American West, and, there's no reality check, quite candidly, in terms of connecting supply versus or aligning demand with the reality of supply. And I'm really glad that Kari brought up groundwater, because groundwater is invisible and we're mining it at an incredible pace. So there's that perception. There's a disconnect between demand and supply. David brought up that, water is not valued. It's essentially free. And that's problematic for both the public sector and the private sector. Poor governance, and I'm being polite when I use that term, but if we're really going to have an impact on ensuring that we have a sustainable and secure relationship with water, then we need to get public policy lined up in the right way, and all the governance challenges that we face. And a related issue is that there's no transparency. I mean, civil society, I want to say at large, doesn't have a clue. And it doesn't have a clue because we're still talking about what's going on in the American West as a drought. And it's not a drought. It's aridification. It's not going to get better. And we need to adjust accordingly in both the public and private sectors. So we need greater transparency, greater honesty. We need to move away from any notion that a voluntary program on conservation is going to get it done, and have a strategy.
Thanks, Will. And really on that point of public policy coming into play, I want to go back to David. What can be done more to get more government involved, even in the issue of water stewardship, for example? What are some of the strategies that can be done to promote this more, so that more public bodies are more engaged in this and helping to promote good water conservation?
That's a good question. I mean, I think most governments are aware of it, right? I don't think many are just sitting there and navel gazing while this issue around water stress goes on. I think the issue with government oftentimes is just their ability to move with speed, right? Government typically take a long time to get things going. They're typically resource constrained. And I think from a private sector point of view, I think the opportunity comes from our point of view in terms of our ability to move with speed. And we've seen some really successful partnerships as a result of that. And a great example of this is a partnership we got with Kari's organization, the Nature Conservancy in the city of Cape Town, where we're working with the city of Cape Town there to establish a fund which looks at conserving the local watershed there. Now, the city was a slow entrant, but they showed their willingness to participate. And from the private sector point of view, we injected the initial funding, we've got the project going. And it's really interesting to see now from a funding point of view how it's now shifting over to the local government paying the majority for this partnership as opposed to the private sector. So I think this is where the private sector has got a role. We've got a really good, strong voice. We've got a platform. We've got the ability, as I said, to move with speed. We can bring resources a lot quicker to government or to these projects at least. But I guess the key here is ensuring that these channels of communication are always open, that they're bringing local government or national government from the get-go. Because I think oftentimes what happens is the private sector starts projects and then, maybe we should bring government in, which is often, it's not ideal. So I think running back to your answer, you know, I think the way we do this from a private sector point of view, early engagement, bring those resources in, we can catalyze these projects, and then once that gets going, bring government in along.
Awesome. Kari, do you agree with that process, the early engagement and then bringing government on later on?
Yes, David gave a great example, and we've seen that happen in other places around the world where we've worked with private sector partners to get programs going. You know, when we've got a sort of innovative idea, or we need funding and support and collaboration to get a program off the ground, that has worked in dozens of places around the world, where we've established, like in Cape Town, a program of water, of resilient watersheds or water funds, where we create a sustainable governance and financing program. And in most of those cases, you know, it is civil society or NGOs and private sector showing up first to put in that investment and sort of take a little bit of a risk in developing these programs, and then but engaging government along the way, all kinds of sectors of government, whether it's the water providers or the agricultural sector ministries or environmental ministries, or those working with small communities in the places where the water comes from. And but the end goal needs to be sort of embedding these kinds of programs, these kinds of this kind of funding into government, into, for example, water user fees, just a small portion of that going to spend on this kind of investment in the watershed. And so I think that's one example of how you could work with the kind of collaboration or the opportunity for the private sector, for civil society or NGOs and the government to work together, where, as David mentioned, the government moves at a very slow pace and may not be willing to take some of the risks that you might want to take for innovation. And so I think that partnership between these different actors is incredibly important to get us moving in the right direction, to start moving in towards more innovative solutions. You know, I think we'll probably talk about different kinds of technologies that can help us do a better job of creating that transparency that Will mentioned, and get a better understanding and manage the uncertainties that are presenting themselves in terms of water management due to lots of changes around the world, including climate change. And I think the private sector also has a really important role to play there. But in the end, we really need government bought into helping us solve these problems, because a lot of it comes down to that governance, the policies, the sustainable funding. And we need that commitment from government to regulate and to really address the problems that we're facing, so that we can the economies continue to grow, people can continue to have access to water, and we are also making sure we're maintaining sort of our different kinds of freshwater and terrestrial ecosystems that are really important to sustaining everything else. So I think that there's an important role for all of us, but government needs to commit to better policies and commit to this better water management in different areas.
And we'll definitely come to innovative approaches later on, but looking also at the private sector, Will, what can be done there? You know, there's this term I mentioned earlier, water stewardship. What are some of the innovative, say successful approaches to water stewardship today that private sector can serve as an example there?
Yeah. So the way I look at it is that the private sector historically, and this goes back quite a while, viewed water as a management issue, compliance issue. So it was about complying with regulations, perhaps water efficiency. And what has happened over the past couple of decades, the corporate world has moved to water stewardship and understanding that they have an important role to play in solving water. I talk about water as a wicked problem, and both Kari and David really kind of touched on the role of all stakeholders, all actors in coming together to solve wicked water problems. But, water stewardship, primarily a risk management strategy for the most part, ensuring, social license to operate, ensuring brand value in the scheme of things. What I find interesting right now is that companies are thinking beyond sort of traditional water stewardship. and they're thinking about their role beyond just the water footprint. And what that means is that they are engaged in being a catalyst, and my colleagues brought up that word, and the ability to act with speed and scale and engage entrepreneurs, investors, additional NGOs, academic institutions, utilities, and the public sector. And you need all of them to contribute and do what they do best. And while I think it's easy to, bash the public sector because they move too slow, their advantage is that once they move, they have an enormous positive impact. So, I think there's just this awakening that the private sector has the ability to really move from the entrepreneurial world, the investor world, all the way to the public sector in concert with NGOs like TNC and WWF and others. So I think the exciting part is what companies are doing with respect to innovation, not just in technology, but in partnerships with funding and financing. And, I'm an optimist. I get excited about this because I believe we can do better, and we're starting to see that.
David, still on the private sector, I mean, would you give us the PepsiCo perspective here and how that ties into your work?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I agree with Will that, water stewardship is it's a journey, it's not an end destination, and it's continually evolving as science, data, our collective knowledge improves. So this whole definition of water stewardship starts shifting. And if you look at what the private sector was doing back in the kind of 1990s, 2000s, it was very much water use efficiency and concentrating on that, to where we are today, which is a fundamental shift in terms of our approach to water. And for me, what does a good water stewardship strategy look like? It's taking that value chain approach, understanding from your sourcing through to your production, through to your end consumer, to where you're sourcing your water from. It's taking that holistic approach to water. It's contextualizing that in a local context. So water is extremely local, unlike carbon, where you can have a global framework and global approach to it. Water has to be approached at each watershed, because the stakeholders are different, what the issues are going to be different. So it's really important that from a water stewardship point of view, that gets taken into consideration. I think, as Will said, which is really important, it's moving. Yes, it is a business risk mitigation to a certain extent, but certainly from a commercial growth and opportunities strategy, water is becoming really important in terms of how we position ourselves and right-size ourselves for the future in a very water uncertain world. And that deep collaboration with stakeholders, local stakeholders, in terms of how we develop joint solutions going forward. And that's really what informed our overall PepsiCo net water positive strategy. It's really developing a strategy that not only looks to achieve water sustainability for the business, but also for local ecosystems that we rely on, for not only for water but for agriculture, for example, and also those local communities. And that's kind of then developed into our key approaches, which is around water use efficiency for operations, and we've differentiated between high water risk and non-high water risk facilities. It's the work that we're doing in our key watersheds that are at risk. So investing in partnerships like Kari was talking about, the water funds. We've got about 36 collective partnerships globally. We take a very strong approach to water governance through all our operations. And then also, importantly, two others, water access. So we've got a really ambitious goal of hitting 100 million people by 2030. And that just kind of recognizes the fact that we have to bring our communities along with us. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, agriculture is key. So we've got a regenerative agriculture goal, and that really talks to ensuring measurably improving the watershed health of some of our key growing regions as well. So overall, we're looking to, I guess, where we're trying to position ourselves is that wherever PepsiCo operates, water resources are better off because of our presence. And that's, I think, where the heart of our strategy is really moving to that holistic approach.
Awesome. Want to talk about innovation now, which a few of you have mentioned. Really, big. I mean, innovation cuts across different industries. We see the impact, and looking specifically here, and when it comes to water management and helping to mitigate this risk, what innovative approaches or technologies do you believe can make a difference, already making a significant difference in helping us use water more efficiently? I'd like to start with Will, please.
Sure. So the way I think about innovation is not just technology, and we touched on that briefly, but I will start with technology, of course. So for me, the two biggest trends in the world of water right now, and the biggest being digital tech, which means it's everything from remote sensing data, so real-time data acquisition and analytics, and giving all stakeholders the ability to know water quantity on a real-time basis without the lag, water quality on a real-time basis, using satellite data, on the ground sensors, sensors in the built environment, so homes, commercial buildings, and industrial applications. Obviously, agriculture, smart ag is critical to this. So if you want to, get a glimpse into really what technology innovation looks like in the world of water, look at digital. And I would say that digital tech is transforming not just the private sector, companies like PepsiCo, but utilities. And utilities are actually further along than I would have thought just a few years ago. And the public sector also. So digital. And the second major trend that I think is really critical in transforming the water sector is decentralization. So if you think about it right now, we have centralized water infrastructure. And in the US, it delivers drinking water quality to your home built environment, and you can go flush your toilets with it, which is lunacy. We have the technology now to deploy technologies both in the industrial sector and in the private sector and homes in particular that will reuse water, so you're not always using fresh water, and giving us an option to deliver wastewater treatment at the local level, neighborhood level, and in the built environment. That ties into the intersection with climate change, which gives us infrastructure that is more sustainable and more resilient than costly centralized systems. Touching on a couple of other dimensions of innovation, innovation and partnerships, both David and Kari talked about that in South Africa. That's really exciting because it's bringing stakeholders together in a very different way and leveraging what they do best. So I tend to focus a lot and get very excited about innovation and partnerships. And then also innovation in business models. So water as a service, water treatment as a service is gaining traction, and that's really exciting. So a corporation, I would say in particular, doesn't have to spend money on infrastructure. They can get the value of both water supply and water treatment as a SaaS model. And these things don't sit in silos. So innovative business models and innovative partnerships drive technology innovation, and it's much more collaborative than you might think. So, and I tend to get excited about innovation because I believe it's an exciting path forward, and every stakeholder can participate in that innovation trend.
Kari, what is your take on the use of data to mitigate, some of these risks?
Yeah, I think Will is spot on there. I think he mentioned some technologies that are helping us get more real-time information, which I think is going to be critical in terms of managing in the light of all this uncertainty. With climate change, really, the big picture for water is that there's increased uncertainty on what we expect. In the past, we could use historical data to sort of predict what might happen in the future and to create scenarios around management, but that isn't the case anymore. So having the remote sensing, having AI analysis that can help us engage in that more real-time management is critical for us to be able to quickly adapt to the changes that are happening in terms of our water systems, things that we haven't seen before. So yeah, I think that is going to be really important for helping us be able to both hopefully increase transparency around water, but also just have that real-time management that we need in order to meet these new challenges.
You mentioned AI, and I'd say in the last few months, been a lot of hype around AI, even generative AI, ChatGPT, and how, across different industries, helping to really accelerate and transform innovation. I know you've touched on that a bit in terms of innovation, but I'd like to drill, down a bit more into Will?
Yeah, no, I'm happy you're asking this question. I got all excited.
Yeah, I mean, just wanted to ask it. It's just, the buzzword is AI across, and it's really just would like to get a bit more thoughts on that, into how AI specifically is helping to change or drive change when it comes to, water, preserving water.
Yeah, Kari, I'm glad you brought up AI. It's an incredibly powerful tool because it gives stakeholders the ability to understand what might happen going forward. So that forward-looking view is critical. And historically, as professionals in the world of water, we've always looked back as a guide to the future, and you can't do that anymore. History is not a guide to the future because of climate change, period. So how do we use AI as a predictive tool to understand scenarios and plan accordingly from a infrastructure perspective, from an ag perspective? Preserving ecosystems is absolutely critical. And we're seeing AI tools show up in the industrial sector and the public sector, utilities in particular. And one thing I would add about utilities, in the US, we have an aging workforce in the utility sector, and how that knowledge cannot walk out the door. So we have to take that knowledge and couple it with, AI solutions. So the sector continues to deliver, safe drinking water for, industrial applications and so on. So AI is a, incredibly valuable tool. There are a number of startups and growth stage companies out there that are getting pretty significant funding right now, investment, and having an exit where they're being acquired by companies that you wouldn't think are water tech companies. So I get really excited about the potential of AI beyond, the ChatGPT solutions and all that. And obviously, it's not something I pay a lot of attention to, but in AI and water tech, it's a hot play right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. David, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely agree with both what Will and Kari were saying. We're really starting to see how digital and AI are starting to transform our ability to act, essentially, and a lot quicker and with a lot more insight. I think also, just kind of picking up on the AI side, what's really interesting is, so for example, what we're looking at is, a lot of our processes currently within our factories are manual processes. Like when you're cleaning systems out, the operator goes, opens a valve, waits for a certain amount of time, turns the valve off, and then does whatever the steps need to be done. What AI is doing over here is that it's making that process a lot more scientific. So the water knows exactly when to cut off, so we're not wasting water. So we're not waiting on an operator manual that says run it for an hour. AI will monitor the system. As soon as it's clean, that could be after 45 minutes, it will cut off. So there's a really interesting area that AI is starting to play within our factories in terms of our ability to manage water, in terms of both water usage, but also importantly detecting where there are issues, leaks, etc. Beforehand, the operator might come across a leak after some time, after a week, and looking at the data, AI identifies that leak straight away. So really interesting area that's starting to evolve within the factories, as from a technology point of view as well.
No, very interesting. I mean, like saying earlier, digital water, how these systems place AI at the heart of any way of managing water. So it'll be interesting to see how things evolve from here. I have a question from the audience, which I'd like to just slide in before we continue. So it's from Vanessa Jacklish from Telemadrid. Is asking if there's any input on Biden's administration policy. I don't know which one of you can take this. Well.
Oh, David.
Oh,
No,
David.
David.
Kari.
I think you should answer that question, David.
Thanks, Will, but no, I'll get that one.
David, it's all yours.
Hey, Kari, do you want to go first?
I'll just mention a couple of things. I think one of the innovations that I think the Biden administration has done has been a roadmap for investment in nature-based solutions, which has never happened before. And of course, as a conservation organization and a person that works in investments in nature-based solutions, which is basically protecting, restoring, or improving management of our natural ecosystems and agriculture, I think that's fantastic, including sort of the commitment from the national government around that and providing guidance on sort of where the investments need to go to help us scale up those investments. So that's one thing that that they've put out that I thought was a really important piece of work and a good commitment by the administration. I think one of the challenges of how government flows in the U.S. is recently the Supreme Court or federal court passed a law to or ruled in favor of a suit to roll back some of the regulation around wetlands and what counts as protected streams and headland waters. And so even if the current administration is committed to improve protection of waterways or of our water systems, there's still we're still stepping backwards in some other areas, which it was disappointing to see that happen in the last week. But yeah, there's a whole variety of areas that that the administration is working in. Well, what have you seen so far? In terms
I think it's interesting. In quotes. So yeah, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of U.S. policy, both from the Supreme Court, rulings by the Supreme Court, but also in terms of what the current administration is focused on. I would say in general, it's positive that water is being paid attention to at the federal level. And the investment that the administration is making is positive. It's not nearly enough. Can it be a catalyst for further investment? I would certainly hope so. I'm a little bit concerned that it's investment in last century infrastructure. So, Kari brings up nature-based solutions. That's a glimmer of hope that we're starting to think differently about infrastructure. So that's good. Two last points. One, in the US, we have no shortage of regulation at both the federal, state, and the local level. But we don't have a national water strategy at all. It's incredibly ad hoc. So that's really what we need. We need to tie it back to the value of water to, economic development, business growth, ecosystem health, social well-being. We don't do that. And one last point, again, I sit in Denver, Colorado, headwater state for the Colorado River Basin. The threat of federal intervention in the Colorado River Compact was enough to get the lower basin states to cut a deal on how to manage the shortfall between supply and demand. So, that hammer showed up, and that was a trigger for collaboration and resolution, at least for the time being. So we'll see how it goes. But that's my 2 to 3 cents.
Thank you. We have another question still on the policy, and this one will go to David. We have an audience member asking, what is the difference in the policy between the US and Europe, and which could be called more progressive and proactive between Europe or the US?
Wow.
David, this is all yours.
It's a good, I don't think any system's perfect, to be honest. I think Europe has traditionally been very proactive on the EU, at least on the regulation side, particularly in water. Yeah, I would probably gut feel would probably suggest that EU is ahead of the US in terms of the way they regulate water bodies. But still, even within the EU, I think there is massive room for improvement in terms of how these water bodies are regulated, and you know, as the points that Will and Kari are making in terms of how we look at nature-based solutions. So yeah, it's not a great answer, but yeah, EU I probably suggest is edges ahead.
Kari, any thoughts on that, or Will, feel free to chime in.
I would tend to agree. But yeah, getting into the details of, you know, I'm very familiar with U.S. policy, pretty familiar with European, but not in the detail of comparing, you know, yeah, specific laws around, for example, groundwater. We've mentioned that's really lacking in the U.S., and I'm decently sure that also is behind in Europe. But in the case of, as I mentioned, point source pollution, I think both places are doing a great job. Maybe Europe is doing a little bit better on the non-point source, but yeah, they both have a ways to go. I think we can there's room for improvement across both areas, and room for learning across not only U.S., Europe. Australia has some pretty progressive policies because it's been faced with some of the challenges, you know, that due to water scarcity and other challenges. So I think look across the globe for lessons on how to better manage our water.
Awesome.
Yeah, Will, if I could jump in real quick, and I'll venture into dangerous territory here because I'll get a lot of feedback from friends in Europe. I would say that I agree that I believe from a policy strategy perspective, Europe's ahead. However, I would say from an innovation perspective, the U.S. is ahead. You know, and I would say innovation and technology. There are really great startups coming out of Europe, but if you look at the U.S. ecosystem of investors and startup community, it's significant. So for me, if we can sort of level the playing field and you know, cross-pollinate what, you know, different parts of the world do well, then we got a shot at solving water for everybody.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Will, on that. Another question here. What are the expectations related to AI, related to the AI field in the next decade, and how ready are organizations to implement AI tools? Will you like to start on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to put AI in the context of any digital transformation that either public or private sector enterprise goes through. So there was a book that came out a while ago, The Technology Fallacy, that talks about the critical role of people and culture and leadership in any digital transformation. So, easy for us to fall in love with technology categories and so on, but we have to put it in the context of, well, it has to interface with humanity, with people, and regardless of where they sit. Having said that, I think there's enormous potential for AI and other digital technologies to give us the ability to be more transparent, to understand what the future might hold, and start building and investing in infrastructure that is more sustainable and resilient in facing infrastructure. And it's not just climate change, rather. And it's not just infrastructure, it's the built environment. So, homes, commercial buildings, manufacturing operations, and agriculture. So there's enormous promise in AI, but my cautionary note is it's not just AI, it's how people use AI tools and giving them the capacity and understanding how to apply those tools in a way that has a positive impact.
David, in your view, are organizations ready to implement these tools?
Yeah, I think PepsiCo is very much like most other organizations at the moment, in the sense that it's still, I guess, at the bottom of the mountain climbing up. It's very new to all of us. I think we're all trying to assess it. We're all getting our heads around it, got teams looking at it, and there's absolutely, you know, from some of the anecdotal case studies and pilots that we've seen or done ourselves, the potential is massive. But, you know, to Will's point, there's still a lot that we need to figure out. And you know, just like any new thing, it's going to be a progression to get to that point. So I think, yes, you know, is the private sector ready? I'd say yes, but, you know, it's going to be a journey. It's not as though we can flick a switch and suddenly we're going to be able to implement and run it throughout the organization. That's not the case, as with any new technology. So certainly the appetite is there, the interest there, we see the potential, but there's a long ways to go.
Thanks for that. Kari, another question here. Water pollution is a growing concern. What steps can be taken to mitigate contamination and restore polluted water bodies? I think you've touched on that a bit, you know, in the discussion, but maybe give us a more round-up answer.
Sure. Yeah, I think as a starting point, there are still places in the world where regulation is lacking around point source pollution, and yeah, we need to get a handle on that in all areas of the world, not only passing those policies, but enforcing those policies. So that's a starting point. And as I mentioned, in some places around the world, we've got a decent handle on that piece. For the non-point source pollution, which is a problem all over the world, we need to seek out solutions to address those both at the source, sort of, you know, for example, in agriculture, which is a big source of non-point source pollution because of fertilizers and pesticides applied on the landscape that then runs off into our waterways. We need to, and we are getting better at being more precise about how we apply those kinds of chemicals. And then there are, we kind of talk about on the field, edge of field, you know, there are investments where we can, you can place different kinds of interventions, as I mentioned, sort of nature-based solutions, things like a two-stage ditch or vegetation, basically, that's filtering those pollutants as they come off the landscape. And then as you move across the landscape and get closer to our water bodies, there's riparian vegetation, which is the vegetation along the waterways, which can also help filter those pollutants. So those are just some of the ways that we can address non-point source pollution, and that you know, I focused on agriculture there because they are one of the biggest sources of the non-point source pollution. You know, we know how to address those challenges, but we really need to scale up those investments in those on the ground practices and in those nature-based solutions that can help reduce the load of pollutants getting into our waterways and causing problems like eutrophication and others. We didn't mention, you know, some of the, as Will said, you know, water is a wicked problem, and there's you know, specific wicked problems such as plastics in our waterways, chemicals such as PFAS, you know, the sort of forever chemicals that we're discovering are in many places now where we've had manufacturing or, for example, military activities and other kinds of activities that have included these chemicals. So there are, those ones are, to me, are a bigger challenge that we are just getting our hands around and coming up, developing solutions to address some of those pollutants that are being discovered in many different places. So I think we still have some ways to go on specific pollutants, but I think we know how to address point source pollution. We actually do know how to address non-point source pollutions. It's more difficult, but we need to scale up some of those solutions. But I think there's always new challenges in terms of water quality that are on the horizon that we need to continue to work on. I don't know what Will and David, if you have anything to add on that question.
Yeah, on the especially on the agriculture aspect, David, in terms of, you know, strategies that farmers and agricultural industries can, you know, implement to reduce their water footprint whilst also ensuring food security, which is important.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, from a PepsiCo point of view, we've obviously implementing our regenerative agriculture strategy, which is going to be massively important in terms of not only, like as Kari was mentioning, the impacts of fertilizers and nutrients applications to fields, where this becomes a lot more precise and a lot more forgiving, at least on the natural environment. It also plays an important role in water retention. So as you start improving your soil health, that the ability of that soil to hold on to water improves quite significantly. So that's one area that we're looking at. It's also working with farmers to transition from some of the more water inefficient technologies for irrigation to more water efficient technologies like drip irrigation. We just invested quite heavily in a new technology out of Israel, in drip, which really is an efficient way to use drip irrigation without the mass amount of energy that typically is required, so allowing a lot more farmers access to it. The other interesting part about what we're starting to look at as well is looking at watershed health in growing regions as well. So it's one thing getting PepsiCo growers super efficient and best in class, but at the surrounding farmers and the surrounding watershed is not up to scratch. It doesn't make a difference, right? We're still a small player in a much bigger pond. So we're trying to understand how we can support other growers to adopting more water efficient technologies, as well as looking at a watershed level, how we can start enacting improvements there through things like water funds and partnerships to improve general water health.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, Will?
Can I jump in real quick? The ag sector is obviously critically important, and I think it's a really good way to think about innovation and partnerships and innovation in technology and innovation in funding. Because a company like PepsiCo needs to ensure that they have a supply chain, and it's no longer enough just to sort of have a contractual relationship with your supply chain. You have to be engaged, and you have to support the ag sector. You have to support the vast number of smallholder farmers, and that means sharing best practices. That means identifying and investing in innovative technologies and delivering that, and working closely, obviously, with NGOs and other stakeholders. So it's really a piece of that puzzle on innovation that is really exciting, because it's more than technology.
Thanks, Will. We have, I'm mindful of time here. We have a question from Rob Tobe, and I'd like each of you to just really briefly get your thoughts on that. And it's, what is your biggest fear for the next decade if the policy steps are not enough? I guess if the policy currently in place is not enough. So we'll do a rapid David, Kari, and then Will.
Wow. Yeah, look, I mean, I think if the policies part doesn't materialize, I mean, I think from experience, we still will find a way, right? Between the private sector, the NGOs, civil society, we will find a way. It's obviously we need that enabling environment from a governance point of view and policy point of view, that just makes life a lot easier and more sustainable. But certainly we will find a way. I think, yeah, my worry there is that if there's no policy cohesion, this sort of types of regulation that can come up can be counterproductive, particularly if you've got agricultural departments advocating for more water and the water department saying, hey, less water. And when you have that lack of cohesion across government departments, that's where things can go awry quite quickly.
Thank you, Kari.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with David. I think that, as we're doing in some places, even when policy is not in place, there are actors doing good work and moving towards improvement in how we manage our waterways. But I do have fears around what might happen if we don't put certain policies in place. I mentioned groundwater, and already the conflicts that are arising between bigger water users and even communities in the US that have run out of water during times that other bigger users are pumping that water. People are not having water in their households. And also limits to growth. We're seeing just recently in Arizona, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner, but Phoenix has said to a developer that had built all these homes, we don't have water to give you. And we just simply don't. And so I think we will have a lot of positive, and we are continuing to have movement in a positive direction, but without policy and cohesive and smart policy, I think we're going to be running into a number of conflicts in different places. As David said, water is really local. I don't think in 10 years, we're going to have this sort of global catastrophe, but many local conflicts are going to come up around water supply, because we're going to be hitting some limits. We already are in a couple of places, but that's going to happen more and more. And so that's going to have huge impacts on economies, on where people want to live and migration of people because they're running out of water. And so I do think policy is a critical piece in the puzzle. But in the meantime, we will be continuing to make positive movements in the right direction. I think we can. So I think we'll continue to work to do that, as well as continuing to advocate for those policies that we need.
Awesome. Will, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I am profoundly concerned by the lack of speed in the public sector in aligning reality with regulations that have been around for 100+ years. So for me, I spend my time and I think a lot about what are the interventions, what are the levers that other stakeholders can pull to accelerate technology, public policy innovation. And I think it's certainly in technology. I also believe there's an important role for civil society. So as water professionals, how do we communicate in a way that is clear and concise and conveys the message on the value of water and what that means for all of us? So the communication piece and engaging civil society is a way to change public policy, I believe, is a lever worth pulling.
Quick rapid fire question as we wrap up, in just one sentence, what are your thoughts on, the one thing that can be changed? We've spoken about a lot of things today: fixing our relationship with water, the demand supply issue, and ensuring, a more water secure world. In your view, the one thing that needs to be changed or that can be modified in order to, spur growth in this sector? David?
Yeah, I'll go first. My one thought, we've touched policy, which is important, but I think one thing that's really important for me is cross-sector collaboration, right? Making sure the water guys are talking to the agriculture guys, are talking to the energy guys, because that nexus, that interconnectivity is so critical. And we typically work in silos, right? And there's so much opportunity there to not only from an ideas side, but also to collaborate around some of these critical areas. So definitely we need to improve that cross-sector collaboration.
Thank you. Kari?
Yeah, and David, that's exactly what I was going to say. I started off saying, why I'm in water is because of the connections between everything that's around water. And I think those connections are definitely clear between agriculture, between energy, between what's happening, climate change, people's health and well-being, and our ecosystem. So I think what is going to make the biggest difference is that awareness of those connections and making big decisions with that kind of systems view of which moving us in the right direction in terms of all of those different challenges and in all those different sectors.
All right. Will?
I believe we need to be honest, transparent, and concise in our communication with civil society on what's going on. We need to speak to the layperson, because if we can't get civil society to care about water, then we're going to hit speed bumps and roadblocks. And Kari mentioned one in terms of impacting economic development. And I'm surprised also that we haven't seen it sooner, but it'll get attention. It is getting attention. So language matters.
Language matters, and on that note, this brings us to the end of our educational program. Why we need to be paying more attention to water, brought to you in partnership with PepsiCo. Would like to thank our guest again, David Grant, Kari Vigerstol, and Will Sarni for their great insights and engaging conversation. I've learned a lot. I'm sure our participants as well. Also want to thank everyone who joined us today. We look forward to hosting you at our next event. So thank you very much, everyone. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.